I was in court when the judge gave my mom 2 years for attacking my grandma. That's when I lost the only family member I ever trusted. Dad squeezed my shoulder during the whole ride to his parents' house. It's just temporary, he said, until I can figure things out. Grandma was already on the porch, her camera hanging around her neck like always. Dad hugged me at the door. Be good for Grandma and Grandpa. His voice cracked. I'll visit every day. Grandpa appeared behind Grandma, his hand on her shoulder. We'll take excellent care of her, son. Don't you worry. Something passed between them in that look. Dad left without looking back. The guest house smelled like paint and new locks. This will be your space, Grandma said, leading me through the converted garage. We want you to feel safe here. I noticed the windows had child locks installed. When did you? Oh, we've been preparing, Grandpa said from the doorway. His eyes tracked my every movement. Since your mother's first arrest, we knew this day would come. That night, I couldn't sleep. Their voices drifted through the thin wall between the guest house and their kitchen. We need to fabricate fresh bruises on our body, Grandma said. Make it seem like the child is abusing us. Tomorrow night, Grandpa replied, after she's had time to settle in. My blood went cold. I grabbed my phone to text Dad, but there was no signal. The Wi-Fi was password protected. Even the landline in the guest house just buzzed dead air. The next morning, Grandma brought breakfast on a tray. Click. Another photo. You look tired, sweetheart. Did you sleep poorly? She studied my face like she was measuring something. Your mother had trouble sleeping too. Before her. Episodes. My mom's not crazy, I said. Grandma's face went hard. Your mother attacked 3 people. The judge saw the evidence. She set down the tray too hard. Violence runs in families. We're watching for signs. I waited until I thought they left for groceries, then searched everywhere for a phone. Nothing. The windows had child locks. They only opened 2 inches. The door only opened from outside. I was trapped. Looking for something? Grandpa stood in the doorway. I want to call my dad. He's at work. Grandpa stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The social worker comes tomorrow. She needs to see proof that you're dangerous, just like your mother. What? Some scratches on my arms. Maybe a black eye. He moved closer. You're going to give them to me. I backed against the wall. I won't hurt you. You won't have to. He smiled. You just have to look like you did. That's when I saw Grandma through the window with her camera. Click. See? You're already threatening me, Grandpa said, backing me into a corner. I had to defend myself. I ran for the door, locked. Grandma entered, camera ready. Get some pictures of her looking angry, Grandpa said, before we rough ourselves up. I grabbed a lamp and smashed the window. The alarm screamed through the house. She's destroying property, Grandma shouted, taking pictures. Just like her mother. I kicked out the glass and squeezed through. Hit the ground hard. My ankle twisted, but I ran across their lawn toward the neighbor's house. There's nowhere to go, Grandpa called out, walking calmly behind me. I reached their automatic gate. The Hendersons' fence was 6 feet high, but I had to try. I grabbed the top, pulling myself up. Grandpa caught my ankle. The neighbors already know about your violent mother, he said. Who do you think they'll believe? I kicked free and dropped into the Hendersons' yard. Ran to their door, pounding with bloody hands. Help! Please! Mrs. Art Henderson opened the door. Oh my gosh, what happened? My grandparents are trying to frame me. There she is. Grandma appeared at the fence, crying. We're so sorry, Janet. She had an episode. Broke our window. Mrs. Henderson was already looking at me differently. That careful look people give dangerous things. They're lying, I said. They want to hurt themselves and blame me. Sweetheart. Mrs. Henderson's voice went soft. Let's get you back to your grandparents. No. But she was already guiding me toward the fence. Toward them. Grandpa lifted me over like I weighed nothing. Thank you, Janet. We'll get her help. Back in the guest house. Grandma photographed every cut, every bruise. Click, click, click. Look what you've done to yourself, she said. The social worker will be very interested in your meltdown. My dad won't believe you. Grandma smiled. Your father's the one who asked us to do this. He needs evidence for the divorce. Proof that your mother's violence passed to you. The room spun. That's why Dad wouldn't look at Mom in court. Why he left me here so fast. He was in on it. He wants her locked up forever, Grandpa said. And you in psychiatric care. Much cleaner than a custody battle. The front door opened. Dad's voice. Mom? Dad? How was she? We need to talk, Grandma called back. There's been an incident. Dad appeared in the doorway. Saw the blood. His face went carefully blank. Did she hurt anyone? Only herself, Grandpa said. So far. Dad nodded, still not looking at me. The social worker comes tomorrow. Everything will be documented, Grandma promised. They left me in the guest house with new locks on everything. Tomorrow the social worker would come. She'd see what they wanted her to see. Or so they thought. I spent the locked night replaying their voices through the wall. My phone clutched in my hand with the voice recorder app ready, even though there's no signal to send anything. Every creak of the house made me freeze, wondering if they were coming back to start their plan tonight. I didn't sleep at all. Just stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what happens when that social worker arrives tomorrow. The darkness pressed in on me, and I kept checking the door handle every few minutes to make sure it was still locked from the outside. My mind kept going back to Dad's blank face when he saw the blood, how he didn't even look at me. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the main house and my whole body went tight, but they passed by without stopping at the guest house. I counted my breaths to stay calm, the way Mom taught me before everything fell apart. The hours crawled by so slowly, I thought morning would never come. Morning came with Grandma's key turning in the external lock, and she entered with another breakfast tray, and that camera around her neck like a weapon. She set the food down and studied my face with clinical interest, noting the dark circles under my eyes. I kept my expression blank and didn't touch the food until she left, checking it carefully for anything that might make me sick or drowsy. The eggs looked normal, the toast was just toast, but I sniffed everything before taking small bites. My stomach was too twisted to eat much anyway, but I forced down half the plate because I needed my strength. After I finished, I used the bathroom mirror to document my own appearance with my phone camera, taking pictures of my unbruised face and arms with timestamps. The photos saved to my device even without signal, creating a record of what I actually looked like before they tried to change the story. I angled the camera to catch every part of my face and neck, then took shots of both arms from different angles. My hands shook a little, but the pictures came out clear. I hid the phone in the bottom of my pillowcase where I could grab it quickly if I needed to record audio. The pillowcase had a small tear in the seam that made a perfect hiding spot. Grandpa brought lunch and made small talk about the weather, his voice friendly like we're a normal family. I responded in short sentences and watched his hands, remembering how he grabbed my ankle yesterday. When he asked if I slept well, I said yes, even though we both knew it was a lie, because I was learning that giving them nothing is its own kind of power. He smiled at my answer, but his eyes stayed cold, measuring me. He set the sandwich down and asked if I needed anything, still playing the concerned grandparent. I told him no and waited for him to leave, my heart beating hard the whole time he stood in the doorway. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard a car in the driveway and voices at the front door of the main house. My heart pounded as I recognized this must be the social worker, right on schedule. Grandma's voice drifted through the wall, warm and concerned, explaining how worried they were about me after my violent outburst yesterday. I pressed my ear to the thin wall and listened to Grandma describe the window-breaking incident, her voice shaking with fake emotion. She told the social worker about my mother's violence charges and hinted at Jean's passing down, painting me as a bomb ready to go off. Every word was planned to make me sound dangerous before the social worker even met me. I heard her mention the neighbor having to bring me back, how I was screaming and out of control. The social worker's voice was harder to hear, quieter and more professional. The guest house door opened and Grandma entered with a woman in her 30s carrying a tablet and wearing a professional but kind expression. Lysandra Gibbs introduced herself as my caseworker and asked how I was doing with real concern in her eyes. Grandma stayed in the doorway with her camera, ready to document whatever happens next. I took a breath and asked Lysandra if we could speak privately, my voice steadier than I expected. Grandma cut in right away, saying she needed to stay for everyone's safety given my episode. Lysandra glanced at the child-locked windows and external door lock, her expression shifting slightly, then firmly told Grandma that private interviews are required by protocol. Grandma's face went tight, but she backed out of the room, pulling the door closed behind her. Once Grandma left with clear reluctance, I sat on the edge of the bed and Lysandra took the desk chair, her body language open and patient. She asked me to tell her in my own words what happened yesterday. I started with the window breaking, but she gently stopped me, asking me to go back further, to when I first arrived here. So I told her about hearing them through the wall that first night, their plan to make fake bruises and frame me. My voice shook, but I kept going, explaining the disabled phone and Wi-Fi, the locks that only open from outside. Lysandra took notes on her tablet without stopping me, her face staying neutral but her typing getting faster as I described Grandpa cornering me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the voice recorder app, showing Lysandra the timestamps from last night and this morning. My hands shook a little as I explained that I'd been recording everything since I overheard them planning through the wall, even though there's no signal to send the files anywhere. She leaned forward to look at the screen, her eyes scanning the list of recordings with dates and times. Then I reached under my mattress and pulled out the handwritten timeline I'd created last night, every event logged with the time it happened as close as I could remember. Lysandra took it carefully and started reading, her tablet forgotten for a moment as she absorbed what I'd written. She pulled out her tablet and photographed each page of my timeline, then took pictures of my phone screen showing all the recordings. Something changed in her face as she worked, a shift from professional concern to actual belief. She looked up at me and asked if she could listen to one of the recordings, and I nodded and played the one from last night where they talked about fabricating bruises. Her jaw tightened as Grandma's voice came through the speaker, talking about making it look like I hurt them. When it finished, she photographed my phone again, showing the audio file details, then asked if I had more. I showed her 3 other recordings, including the one where Grandpa said the social worker needed to see proof I was dangerous. Lysandra's typing got faster and more intense as she documented everything. She stood up and asked to see the window I broke yesterday. I pointed to where Grandpa had already covered it from outside with a big piece of plywood, blocking the whole frame. She went to the window and tried to open it, but could only get it to move about 2 inches before the child lock stopped it. She photographed the lock mechanism up close, then moved to each of the other 3 windows and photographed those locks too. Then she examined the door, taking pictures of how the lock only had a keyhole on my side with no way to open it from inside. She asked where the bathroom was, and I showed her the tiny attached bathroom that Grandpa had installed, and she photographed that too. Her questions got more specific after that. She asked what time they usually brought meals, and I told her it varied, but usually breakfast around 8, lunch around noon, dinner around 6. She asked if I could leave the guest house whenever I wanted, and I explained that the door stayed locked from outside unless they opened it. She asked if I ever went into the main house, and I said only that first day when I arrived, never since. She asked if there was a phone in here besides my cell, and I showed her the landline on the wall that just made a buzzing sound when you picked it up. She tested it herself and heard the dead line, then photographed the phone. She asked about the Wi-Fi password, and I told her I never got it, that my phone had no signal and no internet. She pulled out her own phone and checked, and I saw her frown when she realized there was no Wi-Fi network showing up at all in the guest house. Lysandra put her tablet in her bag and sat back down, her face serious but kind. She told me she was coming back within 72 hours for an unannounced follow-up visit, and that she was recommending a full safety evaluation of this placement. Then she asked me directly if I felt like I was in immediate danger right now, this minute. I wanted to scream yes, wanted to beg her to take me away right now, but I knew from reading about CPS online that immediate danger meant emergency removal, and that could mean anywhere, maybe somewhere worse than here. So I took a breath and told her I was really scared, but I thought I could manage if she came back soon like she promised. She reached out and squeezed my hand, which surprised me because I thought social workers weren't supposed to do that. She promised she'd be back and told me to call 911 if anything happened that made me feel unsafe before she returned. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure calling the police would help when my grandparents had all those photos of me looking violent and destroying property. She stood up and called for Grandma, and I heard the key turn in the lock from outside before Grandma opened the door. After Lysandra left, I pressed my ear against the thin wall between the guest house and the kitchen. Grandma's voice came through first, high and anxious, asking Grandpa what that girl might have said. Grandpa's response was quieter, harder to hear, but I caught something about damage control. Then his voice changed, got cold in a way I hadn't heard before, and he said clearly that they needed to accelerate the timeline. My stomach dropped and I grabbed my phone, fumbling to start a new recording. Grandma said something I couldn't make out, and Grandpa raised his voice slightly, saying they couldn't wait for another social worker visit. I held the phone close to the wall, making sure it was picking up their voices. Grandma's next words came through crystal clear, talking about needing visible evidence by tomorrow morning. She said the word evidence like she was discussing a grocery list, casual and practical. Grandpa agreed and said something about making it convincing but not overdoing it. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. They kept talking for another few minutes, discussing timing and what would look most believable to investigators. When they finally went quiet, I stopped the recording and checked to make sure it had saved properly. The file was there, stamped with today's date and time. The guest house door opened maybe an hour later, and both of them came in together. Their faces had this set look, determined and cold. Grandpa closed the door behind them and stood in front of it like a guard. He told me in this flat voice that I wouldn't be having any more private conversations with social workers or anyone else. I backed up against the wall, my heart pounding, but I kept my hand in my pocket wrapped around my phone with the record button already pressed. Grandma stepped closer and said in this loud, careful voice that troubled teens can't be trusted to tell the truth about their own behavior. She was performing again, saying it like she wanted it recorded, but she didn't know I actually was recording. Grandpa added that they were responsible for my safety, and that meant supervising all my interactions from now on. I didn't say anything, just kept my face blank and my phone recording in my pocket. Grandma pulled out her camera and took a few photos of me standing against the wall, and I realized she was building her narrative again, making it look like I was being aggressive or defiant. They stood there for another minute watching me. Then Grandpa said dinner would be delivered at 6 and I was not to make any phone calls. They left and I heard the lock click from outside. The second they were gone, I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording. My hands shook as I checked the file, making sure their voices had come through clearly. It had. I grabbed my notebook and started writing down everything they'd just said while it was fresh in my mind, adding it to my timeline with the exact time. I wrote down Grandpa's words about no more private conversations, Grandma's statement about troubled teens and truth, their faces when they came in. My handwriting got messier as my hands shook harder, but I kept going until I had every detail documented. Then I looked at my jacket hanging on the back of the desk chair. I'd noticed yesterday that the lining had a small tear near the bottom hem. I grabbed the jacket and carefully worked my fingers into the tear, widening it just enough to slide the folded timeline pages inside the lining. I pushed them down toward the bottom hem where they'd be hidden between the outer fabric and the inner lining. Then I smoothed the jacket and hung it back up, checking to make sure you couldn't see the papers from outside. They'd have to actually rip open the lining to find them, and I didn't think they'd go that far during a casual search. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me freeze, listening for footsteps approaching the guest house. The house settled and creaked, and each time I thought they were coming. Around 2 in the morning, I heard their voices again through the wall. I grabbed my phone and started recording, holding it against the wall. Grandpa's voice came through talking about how hard to hit, and my blood went cold. Grandma's voice responded, telling him not to go too far, that it had to look believable. They were actually discussing the mechanics of hurting themselves, debating whether a black eye would be more convincing than just bruising. Grandpa said something about using makeup to enhance whatever marks they made, and Grandma agreed that would be smart. I recorded everything, my phone hidden under my blanket, barely breathing so I wouldn't miss anything. They talked for maybe 10 minutes, planning out exactly what they'd do and when. Grandpa wanted to do it tonight, but Grandma said they should wait until right before the next social worker visit for maximum freshness. The casual way they discussed it, like planning a dinner party, made me feel sick. When they finally stopped talking, I checked the recording. It was all there. Every horrible word. Morning came, but no breakfast appeared. I waited until 9, then 10, watching the door and listening for Grandma's key in the lock. Nothing. I realized they were changing their pattern, keeping me off balance by breaking the routine I'd gotten used to. My stomach growled, but I just drank water from the bathroom sink and tried not to think about food. Around 10:30, the lock finally turned and Grandma came in with a tray. She set it down and said loudly that I'd seemed very aggressive and unstable yesterday with the social worker. Her voice had that performing quality again, like she was talking to an invisible audience. She went on about how concerning my behavior was, and how worried they were about my mental state. I looked at the food, a sandwich and an apple, and started eating slowly. I didn't react to anything she said, just chewed and swallowed while she talked. She seemed frustrated that I wasn't giving her anything to work with. No angry responses or emotional outbursts. After a few more comments that I ignored, she left with her camera, having taken several photos of me eating in silence. My ankle was throbbing bad by mid-morning. When I stood up to use the bathroom, I had to grab the wall because putting weight on it sent sharp pain up my leg. I sat back down and rolled up my pant leg to look at it. The whole ankle was swollen, bigger than yesterday, and the bruising had spread up toward my calf in dark purple and yellow splotches. When Grandma came back to collect the lunch tray, I asked her if I could see a doctor. She looked at my ankle for a second, then said I was just trying to create more drama and get attention. I told her it really hurt, and I thought something might be wrong, but she waved her hand and said I'd be fine, that I was exaggerating like always. The way she refused felt calculated, deliberate. I realized they didn't want any medical professionals documenting my actual injuries, the real ones from jumping out their window. They needed a clean slate, so any marks that appeared later would obviously be new, obviously from me attacking them. If a doctor saw my ankle now and wrote it down, it would mess up their timeline. Around noon, I heard a car in the driveway, and then Dad's voice in the main house. My stomach dropped and I pressed against the wall to listen. He was asking how I was doing, his voice casual like he was checking on a pet they were watching. Grandma's response came through clearly, her tone worried and motherly as she told him about yesterday's social worker visit. She made it sound like I'd been suspicious and manipulative, asking for privacy like I had something to hide. She said my behavior was concerning and getting worse, that I'd been aggressive with her this morning. I waited, pressed against that wall, barely breathing as I listened for Dad to defend me, to question their story, to do anything that showed he still cared. But he just asked if they needed anything, if there was anything he could do to help. Grandma said they had it under control but thanked him for checking in. I heard him say he'd stop by again tomorrow, and then his footsteps heading toward the front door. He was leaving without even asking to see me. 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside and the guest house door opened. Dad stood in the doorway but didn't come inside, like crossing the threshold would somehow make him dirty. He kept one hand on the doorframe and looked at me with that careful expression people use when they're following a script they practiced. He asked if I was behaving myself for Grandma and Grandpa, his voice flat and controlled. I sat up on the bed and looked straight at him, not breaking eye contact. I asked him if he really asked them to do this, to frame me like they were planning. His face went completely blank for about 3 seconds, no expression at all, and then he said we would talk about it later. That was basically him saying yes without actually saying the words. He turned and walked away, pulling the door shut behind him with a soft click. I heard his car start up a minute later and drive away. After he left, the guest house felt different somehow, like the walls had moved closer together while I wasn't paying attention. Knowing my own father set this whole thing up made the air feel heavier, harder to breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed and made myself take slow, deep breaths. Then I stood up and walked to the tiny bathroom, filled a glass with water, and drank the whole thing. I did 10 push-ups on the floor even though my ankle hurt. I needed my body to stay strong even though part of me wanted to just lie down and give up completely. But giving up was exactly what they wanted from me. They needed a broken girl who looked crazy and violent, someone who matched their story. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I went back to the bed and ate the rest of the food from lunch, chewing each bite slowly and completely. Then I did another 10 push-ups. Late afternoon brought the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Then the doorbell rang. Through the thin wall, I heard Grandma's voice go all fake and cheerful as she greeted whoever was at the door. I pressed my ear against the wall and caught bits and pieces of the conversation. Someone mentioned a follow-up visit, and I realized it was Lysandra, keeping her promise about coming back unannounced. My heart started beating faster with something that felt like hope. Grandma's voice got higher and tighter as she tried to explain why nobody told her about this visit, why it wasn't on the schedule. I heard another voice, calmer and lower, saying something about standard procedures. Footsteps moved through the main house, getting closer to the guest house. The door opened, and Lysandra walked in with a man she introduced as her supervisor, Cole. Both of them looked around the guest house like they were seeing it for the first time, even though Lysandra had been here before. Cole walked straight to the windows and examined the locks that only opened 2 inches. He asked Grandpa, who was standing in the doorway, why external locks were needed if I wasn't considered a flight risk. Now, Grandpa started explaining something about safety concerns and making sure I didn't hurt myself, but his voice sounded weaker than usual. Having 2 CPS people asking questions at the same time seemed to throw him off his prepared answers. Cole took photos of the window locks with his tablet, then moved to the door and photographed the mechanism that only opened from outside. Lysandra looked at me and said she noticed I was limping during her first visit. She asked if I could show her my ankle. I sat down on the bed and rolled up my pant leg, revealing the swelling that had gotten worse over the past few days. The whole ankle was puffy, and the bruising had spread up my calf in dark purple and yellow patches. Cole came over and took several photos from different angles, the camera clicking quietly. He asked when I had received medical attention for the injury. I explained that I asked Grandma twice to see a doctor, but she said I was just trying to create drama and get attention. Cole and Lysandra looked at each other for a long moment, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Cole typed something on his tablet, and I saw the word neglect on the screen before he angled it away from me. They asked me to tell them what happened again, but they worded the questions differently than last time. They were checking if my story stayed the same or if I changed details. I told them about hearing Grandma and Grandpa through the wall last night, planning to accelerate their timeline. I described Dad's visit and how he refused to deny being involved when I asked him directly. I mentioned Grandpa's threat that I wouldn't be allowed private conversations anymore. Lysandra's professional face cracked for just a second, and I saw real anger flash across it, anger for me, before she smoothed her expression back to neutral. She said they were taking this very seriously and documenting everything carefully. Cole added more notes to his tablet, his fingers moving fast across the screen. After they left, I heard raised voices in the main house, louder than before. The guest house door flew open and Grandma stormed in, her whole body shaking with rage. She demanded to know what lies I told them this time, what stories I made up to make her and Grandpa look bad. I sat on the bed and didn't say anything, just looked at her calmly. My silence seemed to make her even angrier. She said if I kept making up stories, she would take away my bathroom privileges and I could use a bucket instead. Grandpa appeared behind her in the doorway and put his hand on her shoulder. He told her in a tight, controlled voice that they needed to be careful now, because CPS was probably watching them more closely. Grandma took a deep breath and left without another word, but I could hear her angry footsteps all the way back to the main house. The next morning, I woke up to silence instead of Grandma's key in the lock. I waited for about an hour, wondering if they were going to bring food at all. Finally, I heard something slide across the floor near the door. I got up and found a paper plate with toast and a banana shoved through the gap at the bottom of the door. They were avoiding face-to-face contact now, probably on advice from a lawyer who told them to minimize interaction. The isolation felt like another kind of punishment, another way to make me feel small and powerless. I ate the food mechanically, chewing without tasting anything. Then I pulled out my handwritten timeline and added this new detail, noting how their behavior kept changing in response to CPS scrutiny. Every change they made was more evidence of their guilt. Around midday, I heard a vehicle pull up outside, different from the grandparents' car. Male voices drifted through the window, then Grandpa's angry tone saying something about not being able to walk around the property without permission. A calmer male voice responded with words like child safety investigation and legal authority. I realized CPS was doing some kind of inspection of the whole property, not just the guest house. I pressed my face against the 2-inch gap in the window, trying to see what was happening in the yard. I could see Cole walking around the perimeter of the guest house, taking photos of the exterior locks and the boarded-up window I had broken. Lysandra was with him, pointing at things and making notes on her tablet. The guest house door opened and both of them came inside, their faces serious in a way that made my stomach flip. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Cole looked at me directly and said they were implementing immediate safety modifications to this placement. He explained that the door had to be able to open from inside, so I could get out in an emergency. The windows needed to be fully functional, not locked to only open 2 inches. And I had to have access to a working phone for emergencies. Grandpa started to object from the doorway, saying something about safety protocols. But Cole cut him off with a bunch of legal language about compliance requirements and mandatory conditions for continued placement. A locksmith would arrive within the hour to make the changes. Grandpa's face went red, but he didn't argue anymore, just turned and walked back to the main house with stiff, angry movements. The locksmith showed up about 40 minutes later with a big toolbox and started working on the door right away. Grandpa stood in the doorway watching every move, his jaw tight and his hands clenched at his sides. The locksmith drilled out the old lock mechanism and installed a new one with a handle that worked from both sides. I stood there watching too, not believing this was actually happening. The locksmith tested it a few times, showing me how to turn the handle from inside to open it. Then he moved to the windows and removed all the child safety locks one by one, dropping them in a plastic bag. Each window now opened all the way instead of just 2 inches. The locksmith asked if I wanted to test them, and I did, pushing each one open as far as it would go. Fresh air came in, and I could actually fit through the opening if I needed to. Grandpa made a noise in his throat but didn't say anything, just watched with this look on his face like he wanted to break something. The locksmith packed up his tools and left, and Grandpa walked out right behind him without looking at me. Lysandra came back in carrying a small phone in a clear plastic case. She handed it to me and explained it was for emergencies only, that they would be checking the usage records. Her direct number was already programmed in along with 911 and the main CPS line. I turned the phone over in my hands, not quite believing I was holding a working phone again. Grandma appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. For once, she didn't have the camera around her neck. Her face looked pinched and angry, like she was holding back words she wanted to say. Lysandra told me to keep the phone charged and with me at all times. She said if anything happened, anything at all that made me feel unsafe, I should call immediately. I nodded and slipped the phone into my pocket. After they left, I sat on the bed for a long time just looking at the door handle that I could now open myself. The change felt huge even though it was just a piece of metal. I got up and walked to the door, turned the handle, pulled it open, closed it, opened it again. I did this maybe 10 times, just proving to myself that I could. Then I went to each window and opened them all the way, stuck my head out, pulled them closed again. The psychological shift was enormous. I wasn't completely trapped anymore. That night, I couldn't stop testing the door lock. I would lie in bed for a while, then get up and open the door, look out at the dark yard, close it again. Around midnight, I pulled out the emergency phone and dialed Lysandra's number just to hear it ring. It rang twice, and I hung up before she could answer. I just needed to know it worked, that I could reach someone if I needed to. The small victories felt huge after days of total helplessness. I finally fell asleep with the phone under my pillow and the door unlocked from inside. The next day, Dad showed up without calling first. I heard his car in the driveway and then his footsteps on the path to the guest house. He knocked, which was new, and asked if he could come in. His face looked drawn and tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. I stepped back and he came inside, closing the door behind him. He sat down in the desk chair and I stayed standing near the bed. He looked at his hands for a minute before speaking. His voice came out flat when he finally said he was sorry things got out of hand. But he needed evidence of Mom's genetic violence for the custody case. The words hung there between us. I asked him straight out if he actually believed I was violent, or if he was just using me. He still wouldn't look at me when he answered. He said it didn't matter what he believed. It mattered what he could prove. Something cold settled in my chest hearing him say that. I pulled out my phone and told him I had recorded him refusing to deny his involvement. His head snapped up and his eyes went wide. He asked if I had given the recording to CPS. I just stared at him and didn't answer, letting him sit there wondering. He stood up fast and walked to the door. He left without saying anything else, didn't even look back. I watched him go and felt something final break between us. Whatever relationship we had was gone. All that was left was this clear understanding that he saw me as a tool rather than his daughter. Over the next few days, the grandparents changed their approach completely. Meals started showing up late or not at all. I would wait for breakfast and nothing would come until almost lunchtime. The bathroom ran out of cleaning supplies, and when I asked Grandma for more, she said she would get to it eventually. She didn't. At night, I heard them making noise right outside my windows during the hours I usually tried to sleep, talking loudly, moving things around, anything to keep me awake. I wrote down every single incident in my timeline with dates and times. When Lysandra came for her next check-in, I showed her the pattern. She took photos of my notes and made her own records. She explained that proving harassment was harder than proving physical danger, but she was documenting everything. A few days later, I heard the mail truck outside. Usually Grandma got the mail, but this time she took longer than normal. When she finally came to the guest house, she had an envelope in her hand, and her face looked tight. She handed it to me without saying anything. The envelope was already open, even though it had my name on it. Inside was a letter on official-looking paper from something called Legal Aid. It introduced an attorney named Jimena Castro who offered free legal help for minors in custody situations. There was a phone number and instructions to call collect if needed. I read it twice to make sure I understood. My desperate letter to legal aid had actually reached someone. Grandma stood there watching me read it, her arms crossed. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope without saying anything. After she left, I pulled out the emergency phone with shaking hands. I dialed the number from the letter and a woman answered on the second ring. I started talking fast, explaining my situation before anyone could stop me. I told her about the grandparents' plan, the locks, Dad's involvement, everything. She listened without interrupting, just making small sounds to show she was still there. Then she asked specific questions about CPS involvement, about Dad's role, about what the grandparents had done. Her voice stayed calm and professional the whole time. She told me her name was Jimena, and she was going to contact Lysandra right away to coordinate. She said I did the right thing by calling. 2 days later, Lysandra picked me up and drove me to the CPS office. Jimena was already there in a conference room with Cole. Jimena looked younger than she sounded on the phone, maybe in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back and a serious expression. She shook my hand and told me to sit down. Then she started explaining my legal rights as a minor in protective custody. She used words I had to think about to understand, talking about filing complaints against the grandparents, requesting different placement with other family members, petitioning for a formal hearing. Each option had risks and timelines attached. Some things could take weeks, others months. I felt overwhelmed by how complicated everything was, how all these systems seemed designed for adults who understood legal language. Jimena must have seen my face because she slowed down and started using simpler words. Cole took notes on his tablet while Lysandra added details about the safety modifications and the documented harassment. Then Jimena asked about my mother's case. I explained what little I knew. Mom had been charged with attacking 3 people. The evidence seemed solid according to Dad. The judge had seen everything and still convicted her. Jimena made notes while I talked and then said she would investigate whether Mom's case had any connection to my situation. She said sometimes evidence isn't as clear as it seems. The possibility that there might be more to Mom's story than I was told opened something in my mind. A crack in the narrative I had accepted as true. What if Dad had lied about Mom the same way he was lying about me? Lysandra drove me back to the grandparents' house after the meeting with Jimena. The car ride felt too short. Grandma stood on the porch when we pulled up, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She watched Lysandra walk me to the door without saying anything. Inside, the air felt thick and wrong. Grandpa sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, but his eyes followed me when I walked past to the guest house. I tested the door lock from inside 3 times that first hour back, opening and closing it just to prove I could. The emergency phone sat on the desk where I could see it. These small things mattered now. Freedom to open a door. Ability to make a call. Grandpa came to the guest house that evening with dinner on a tray. He set it down and stood there looking at me for a long minute. Then he started talking about family loyalty and how ungrateful children break their grandparents' hearts. His voice stayed calm, but his words felt like threats wrapped in disappointment. I didn't respond. Just sat on the bed and waited for him to leave. After he went back to the main house, I ate the food slowly and checked it carefully first. Then I opened the door again just because I could. Lysandra called 2 days later while I was in the guest house. She explained they were scheduling a formal safety assessment for the following week. It would include interviews with everyone involved and a written report to family court. She said this was a critical step toward either improving my conditions here or justifying alternative placement. Her voice sounded professional and measured. I asked what alternative placement meant, and she said possibly other family members or foster care depending on what the assessment showed. After we hung up, I marked the date on a calendar I'd started keeping. 7 days to wait. The time stretched out strange and slow. Each morning, I woke up and got through another day of living with people who wanted to destroy me. Grandma brought meals at irregular times, sometimes early, sometimes late. Grandpa made comments about troubled teens and family disappointment whenever he saw me. I kept my face blank and my mouth shut. At night, I lay in bed counting down the days until the assessment. The waiting felt like holding my breath underwater, knowing I had to surface eventually, but not sure if there would be air when I did. 3 days before the assessment, my ankle throbbed worse than ever. The swelling hadn't gone down and walking made sharp pains shoot up my leg. I limped to the main house bathroom that morning and caught Grandma watching me from the kitchen. I asked if I could see a doctor about my ankle. She looked at me for a long moment, then said I was exaggerating for attention just like my mother used to do. She turned back to washing dishes. I limped back to the guest house and sat on the bed staring at the emergency phone. Then I picked it up and called Lysandra's direct number. She answered on the 3rd ring. I explained about my ankle, how it happened when I jumped into the Hendersons' yard, how it still hurt bad, and Grandma kept refusing to let me see a doctor. Lysandra asked specific questions about the swelling and pain level. Then she said she'd be there within 2 hours and I was going to urgent care today whether the grandparents agreed or not. She arrived exactly 90 minutes later with paperwork authorizing medical treatment. Grandma opened the front door looking surprised and angry. Lysandra told her in a firm voice that denying medical care to a minor was neglect, and I was being taken to urgent care immediately. Grandma's face went tight, but she got her purse and car keys without arguing. The urgent care clinic smelled like antiseptic and had fluorescent lights that buzzed. A physician assistant called me back after 20 minutes in the waiting room. She was maybe 40 with tired eyes and gentle hands. She examined my ankle carefully, pressing different spots and asking me to move it certain ways. Each touch made me wince. Then she started asking detailed questions about how the injury happened and why I didn't get treatment right away. I explained the whole situation while she typed notes into her computer. About jumping through the window to escape. About my grandparents refusing to take me to a doctor. About everything that led to that moment. She listened without interrupting and kept typing. Then she took photographs of my ankle from different angles with a medical camera. She photographed the bruising and swelling and documented the range of motion. She asked me to describe the denial of medical care in my own words and typed my statement verbatim. When she finished, she looked me in the eye and said she was a mandatory reporter. That meant she had to file a report with CPS about medical neglect. She said she was sorry I was going through this, but the report would be filed today. The PA confirmed it was a bad sprain that should have been treated days ago when it first happened. She said the delay made the healing process longer and more complicated. She fitted me with a brace that wrapped around my ankle and lower leg with Velcro straps. Then she gave me anti-inflammatory medication and printed out instructions for proper care. Ice packs 3 times a day. Elevation when possible. The brace stays on except for showering. She handed me the papers and then put her hand on my shoulder. She asked if I felt safe at home. The question hung in the air between us. I told her honestly that I didn't know, that I had a caseworker now and people watching, but I still lived with my grandparents, and they were angry about the oversight. She squeezed my hand and said the report would be filed today, that it would add another piece of documentation to my case file, that every report mattered and helped build the full picture. Her hand felt warm, and I wanted to cry but didn't. Grandma drove me back to the house in complete silence. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tight and her jaw clenched. We pulled into the driveway and she got out without looking at me. I followed her inside, limping less now with the brace supporting my ankle. Grandma went straight to the kitchen phone and dialed. I heard Dad's voice answer, and then Grandma started talking fast and angry about CPS overreach and my manipulation of medical professionals. I went to the guest house, but the wall between was thin enough to hear everything. Grandma described me as a pathological liar who had everyone fooled. She said I was dangerous and manipulative just like my mother, that I'd learned how to play the victim and turn people against my own family. Dad's voice responded, but I couldn't make out his words. Just Grandma's half of the conversation painting me as the villain in this story. The irony hit me hard. She was calling me a liar while actively planning to frame me for violence I didn't commit. She was describing me as manipulative while she and Grandpa had orchestrated this entire situation. If it weren't so scary, it would have been funny. But mostly it was just terrifying knowing she believed her own lies, or at least could sell them convincingly enough that other people might believe them too. That night after dinner, I spread everything out on the bed. The emergency phone with all the recorded conversations saved in the voice memo app. The handwritten timeline I'd been keeping with dates and times and details of everything that happened since I arrived. The paperwork from urgent care with the PA's documentation and the mandatory reporter statement. The photos on my phone showing the window locks before they were changed, and the external door lock that used to trap me inside. Jimena's business card with her direct number and the legal aid office address. I gathered it all together and folded 2 pieces of notebook paper to create a simple folder. I labeled it with today's date in clear handwriting. Then I slid all the documents inside and tucked the folder into the lining of my jacket, where I'd been hiding my other papers. The jacket hung in the small closet. If something happened to me, if the grandparents succeeded in making me look violent or crazy, if I disappeared into psychiatric care like they wanted, there would be a record. Someone would find it eventually. The evidence would tell the truth even if I couldn't. The night before the assessment, I lay in bed trying to sleep, but my brain wouldn't stop. I kept running through what I needed to say and how to say it calmly, how to present the facts without sounding emotional or unstable, how to show them I was credible and my grandparents were the dangerous ones. Around midnight, I heard voices in the kitchen. Grandpa's voice came through the wall first, insisting they needed to show some evidence before the assessment, that they couldn't just talk about my violence, they needed something visual. Grandma's voice responded, but she sounded uncertain for the first time since I'd arrived. She said she was worried about going too far with so much scrutiny on them now, that CPS was watching everything and one wrong move could backfire. Grandpa argued that without evidence, the assessment would go in my favor, and they'd lose control of the narrative completely. I grabbed the emergency phone and started recording, holding it near the wall to capture their voices. They debated back and forth about whether to proceed with their original plan, about how much injury would be believable, about timing it so the marks would be fresh for the assessment. I recorded every word, my hand shaking but keeping the phone steady against the wall. The conversation lasted almost 15 minutes before they finally went to bed. I saved the recording with the date and timestamp and added it to my evidence folder. Morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. I heard cars in the driveway around 9, Lysandra's voice at the front door, then Cole's deeper voice, then a woman I didn't recognize. The guest house door opened and Lysandra came in first, followed by Cole and another woman she introduced as a child psychologist. The psychologist looked maybe 50 with gray hair pulled back and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. They asked if they could sit down and interview me here in the guest house. I said yes and sat on the bed while they took the desk chair and the folding chairs Grandma had brought in. Lysandra asked me to walk through the entire timeline from when I first arrived at my grandparents' house to right now, to tell them everything in my own words. I started talking and didn't stop for almost 30 minutes. I told them about overhearing the plan that first night, about the disabled phone and Wi-Fi and the locks that only opened from outside, about Grandpa cornering me and telling me I had to give him injuries, About breaking the window and running to the Hendersons and being brought back. About Dad's involvement and his admission that he needed evidence against Mom. I spoke steadily without crying, and pulled out my evidence folder when I got to the parts about documentation. I showed them my handwritten timeline with dates and times. I showed them the urgent care paperwork and the PA's mandatory reporter statement. Then I played the audio recordings. First the one from that first night when they planned to fabricate bruises. Then the one from last night when they debated whether to proceed despite the scrutiny. The three professionals listened without interrupting. Lysandra and Cole took notes on their tablets. The psychologist just watched me with those kind eyes and nodded occasionally. When I finished, the psychologist leaned forward slightly and asked if she could ask me some questions. Her voice was gentle but not condescending. She asked about my emotional state right now, about my relationship with my parents, about my understanding of what was happening and why. I took a breath and tried to organize my thoughts. I told her I was scared but trying to stay focused on documenting everything and keeping myself safe. That I didn't trust Dad anymore after learning he was part of this scheme. That I missed my mom even though I didn't know if the things they said about her were true, or if Dad had lied about her the same way he was lying about me. The psychologist nodded and made notes on a legal pad with a pen. Her expression stayed compassionate but professional. She asked a few more questions about my sleep and eating and whether I'd had thoughts of hurting myself or others. I answered honestly. Sleep was bad, eating was mechanical, and no, I'd never thought about hurting anyone. I just wanted to be safe and away from here. The psychologist wrote everything down and thanked me for being so open and clear in my answers. The three of them gathered their tablets and folders and stood up together. Lysandra gave me a small nod before they left the guest house, and I heard their footsteps cross the yard toward the main house. The front door opened and closed, and then Grandma's voice started up, loud enough that I could hear it through the walls even with my door still open. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened, my hands pressed flat against my knees to keep them from shaking. Grandma was explaining something in that fake, worried tone she used when she wanted people to feel sorry for her. Her voice kept rising higher, getting more defensive as the professionals asked questions. I caught words like difficult and episodes and just like her mother. Grandpa's voice came next, calmer and more controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath when he talked about safety concerns and necessary precautions. Cole's voice cut through both of them, asking something direct about the external locks and why they were installed before I even arrived. The conversation went on, voices overlapping and interrupting. I heard Lysandra mention the recordings I'd played for them, and Grandma's voice went sharp and angry. She said something about privacy and trust that I couldn't make out fully. The psychologist asked a question in her calm professional voice, and Grandpa stumbled over his answer in a way that made it clear he was caught off guard. More than an hour passed while I sat there listening to them try to explain away everything I'd documented. My ankle throbbed in the brace from urgent care, and I shifted my weight to take pressure off it. Finally, I heard chairs scraping and footsteps moving toward the front door. The professionals emerged from the main house and walked back across the yard. Lysandra knocked on my doorframe even though it was still open, and the other two stayed back near the main house. She came inside and closed the door partway behind her, giving us some privacy. Her face looked tired but determined, and she sat down in the desk chair again. She told me they were recommending enhanced supervision of my placement here, with weekly check-ins from CPS to monitor the situation closely. My stomach dropped because I'd been hoping she would say I could leave right now, that they were moving me somewhere safe immediately. She must have seen it in my face because she leaned forward slightly and explained that the system doesn't work that way. They need documented patterns over time, not just my word against my grandparents' word, even with the recordings. She said they were building a case, but it takes weeks or months to gather enough evidence for a judge to order removal. I asked if that meant I had to stay here with them, and she nodded but promised they would be watching closely now. She told me to keep documenting everything, to call her immediately if anything escalated, and to focus on keeping myself safe while they built the case. The words felt heavy, like I was asked to survive in a trap, while people on the outside slowly worked to spring it open. She squeezed my shoulder before she left and reminded me I had the emergency phone now. I could call any time. After they drove away, the house went quiet in a way that felt dangerous. Grandma and Grandpa didn't come to the guest house that evening. No dinner appeared on a tray. I ate granola bars from the stash I'd been hiding in my jacket and drank water from the bathroom tap. The next morning, Grandma left a plate of toast outside my door without knocking or coming in. I opened the door after I heard her footsteps retreat and brought the food inside, checking it carefully before eating. The silence continued for days. They barely looked at me when our paths crossed in the yard. Meals showed up at weird times, sometimes early morning, sometimes late afternoon, never on any schedule I could predict. They were making a point of not being alone with me, probably because they knew I was recording everything now. The house felt like a war zone where nobody was shooting but everybody was armed. I kept my phone in my pocket constantly, ready to record any conversation. I updated my timeline every night with notes about the irregular meals and the way they avoided me. The waiting stretched out, each day blending into the next. I went to the bathroom, ate whatever food appeared, and tried to sleep through the nights when their voices drifted through the wall, discussing their next moves in careful, quiet tones, I couldn't quite make out. A week into this tense standoff, my emergency phone rang. Jimena's number showed on the screen. I answered fast, and she told me she'd filed a motion for a hearing to review my placement, scheduled for 2 weeks from now. She explained that she was also looking into Mom's criminal case because something about it didn't add up. She'd found inconsistencies in how the evidence was presented, things that didn't match up with the official reports. She told me not to get my hopes up too high because legal cases take time to unravel, but she wanted me to know there might be more to the story than Dad had told me. The possibility that Mom wasn't actually the violent criminal everyone claimed made my head spin. Everything I'd believed about why I was here, why Dad left me with his parents, why Mom was in jail, all of it might be built on lies. Jimena said she'd call me again before the hearing with more information. After we hung up, I sat on my bed staring at the wall, trying to reorganize everything I thought I knew. If Mom wasn't dangerous, then Dad had lied about her the same way he was lying about me. The thought made me feel sick and relieved at the same time. The days crawled by until Lysandra showed up again without warning. She knocked on the guest house door and came in with news that made my heart pound. The court had ordered family therapy sessions, she said, involving me and Dad with a licensed therapist supervising everything. Dad would have to participate if he wanted to keep any custody rights at all. She asked if I was willing to go, and I told her yes, but only if Jimena could be there for the first session. I didn't trust Dad or any therapist he might try to manipulate. Lysandra agreed immediately and pulled out her phone to start coordinating schedules. She said she'd make sure Jimena was present as my advocate, and they'd find a neutral therapist who specialized in family conflict. We set it up for the following week. After Lysandra left, I felt something shift inside me. This was going to be the first time I'd seen Dad since he stood in my doorway and basically admitted he was using me as a weapon against Mom. The thought of sitting in a room with him made my hands shake, but I also wanted him to have to face what he'd done. The therapy office was in a boring building with beige walls and motivational posters about growth and healing. Jimena met me in the parking lot and walked in with me, her hand on my shoulder in a way that felt protective. The therapist introduced herself as Dr. Reyes, a woman with kind eyes and a calm voice that reminded me of the psychologist from the assessment. She had us all sit in a circle, me and Dad across from each other with Dr. Reyes between us and Jimena, sitting slightly behind me in the corner. Dad looked terrible, his face drawn and his eyes avoiding mine. Dr. Reyes explained the ground rules and then asked us each to describe our perspective on what had happened. She looked at me first. I took a breath and started talking, laying out the facts in order without letting emotion leak into my voice. I told her about arriving at the grandparents' house and overhearing their plan that first night, about the disabled phone and the locks and Grandpa cornering me, about running to the neighbors and being brought back, about Dad's involvement and his refusal to deny it when I asked him directly. I watched Dad's face while I talked, and it crumbled slowly like something breaking from the inside. When I got to the part about him needing me to look violent on paper for his custody case, he put his face in his hands. Dr. Reyes let the silence sit for a moment before she turned to Dad and asked him to respond. Dad started talking in this broken voice about being terrified of losing custody to Mom. He said he was desperate to prove she was dangerous because the courts were leaning toward joint custody, and he couldn't let that happen. He talked about how his parents convinced him that violence was genetic, that I would eventually turn out like Mom, and that documenting it early would protect everyone. His voice shook when he tried to explain his reasoning. Dr. Reyes listened without interrupting, her face neutral and professional. Then she asked him a direct question that cut through all his explanations. She asked if he actually believed I was violent. Dad stared down at his hands for what felt like forever. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Finally, he said no. His voice was barely above a whisper. He said he didn't believe I was violent at all. He said he just needed the documentation to look like I was, to build his case against Mom. The admission hung in the air between us, and I felt something final break inside my chest. He'd just confessed to using me as a tool, to not caring about the truth, only about what he could prove on paper. Dr. Reyes let that sink in before she started talking about what rebuilding trust would require. She said it wasn't about apologies or promises. It was about consistent actions over months of work. She told Dad he needed to cooperate fully with CPS, to support whatever placement I wanted, even if that meant living somewhere else, and to get himself into individual therapy to deal with his own problems. She made it clear that words meant nothing at this point. Only actions would matter. Dad nodded and agreed to everything she said, but I felt completely empty watching him. The damage was too deep for any amount of therapy to fix. He'd looked me in the eye and sacrificed me to win a custody battle. That wasn't something you came back from. After the session ended, Jimena walked me out to the parking lot where Lysandra was waiting in her car. Jimena stopped before we reached the car and turned to face me. She told me quietly that she was impressed by how I'd handled myself in there. She said most teenagers would have broken down crying or started yelling, but I stayed focused on the facts and on protecting myself. Her words made something click into place in my mind. I realized I wasn't the same person who'd arrived at my grandparents' house trusting my father and believing what adults told me. That girl was gone. I'd changed into someone harder, someone who documented everything and trusted actions over words. The change felt permanent. 2 days later, I was in the guest house when the emergency phone rang again. Lysandra's voice came through saying she had important news about Mom. She told me that Mom's attorney had requested a formal review of her case based on new evidence that Jimena had helped dig up. Apparently, the 3 attacks Mom was charged with were actually self-defense situations that got misrepresented in court. There was documentation that proved it, paperwork that had been suppressed during Mom's original trial. Lysandra said the prosecution was scrambling to figure out how to respond. The news hit me like a physical blow. Hope and anger crashed together in my chest. Hope that Mom might actually be innocent, that she might get out and we could be together again. Anger that Dad had known the truth and used it against both of us anyway, that he'd let Mom sit in jail while he built his case on lies. I asked Lysandra what happened next, and she said Mom's attorney was pushing for the charges to be dropped entirely. It could take weeks or months to resolve, but there was real possibility now. After we hung up, I sat on my bed with my head in my hands, trying to process everything. My whole world had been built on the story that Mom was dangerous and Dad was protecting me. Now that story was collapsing, and I didn't know what was left underneath. The hearing happened 3 days later in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and floor polish. Jimena sat next to me at a long table, her briefcase open with my evidence folder on top. Dad sat across the aisle with his attorney, a man in an expensive suit who kept shuffling papers. The judge was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging on a chain around her neck. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp when she called the case number. Jimena stood and started presenting my documentation, laying out each piece on a projector screen so everyone could see. The timestamps on my voice recordings, the photos of the locks before they got changed, the urgent care report about my ankle, the CPS reports from Lysandra and Cole. Dad's attorney kept trying to interrupt, calling things misunderstandings and teenage drama. The judge held up her hand and told him to wait his turn. Then Jimena played the audio recording of Grandma and Grandpa planning to fabricate bruises. Their voices filled the courtroom, talking about how hard to hit and whether a black eye would be too obvious. Dad's face went white. His attorney stopped shuffling papers. The judge leaned forward and asked Jimena to play it again. After the second time, she looked directly at Dad and asked him a question. She wanted to know if he participated in a scheme to create fake evidence of my violence. Dad's attorney stood up and started talking about context and misinterpretation. The judge cut him off and repeated the question, this time saying she wanted to hear from Dad directly, not his lawyer. The courtroom went quiet. Dad sat there for what felt like forever, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Then he said yes. He asked his parents to document concerning behaviors, but he claimed he didn't know they would go as far as planning to hurt themselves. His voice was flat, like he was reading from a script. The judge took off her glasses and set them on the bench. She said asking family members to manufacture evidence was conspiracy to commit fraud and child endangerment. Her voice got harder with each word. She ordered Dad to have only supervised contact with me while they did more evaluation. Then she said she was placing Grandma and Grandpa under investigation for attempted abuse. Dad's attorney tried to object, but the judge was already moving on. She turned to me and asked what I wanted. My throat felt tight, but I made myself speak clearly. I told her I wanted to live somewhere safe while Mom's case got reviewed. Somewhere I could go to the school and not be scared. The judge nodded and wrote something down. She said CPS would arrange temporary foster placement with therapy support. If Mom's case got overturned, they would look at reunification. It wasn't perfect, but it meant I was getting out of the grandparents' house. 3 days later, Lysandra drove me to a house on the other side of town. A couple named the O'Neills met us at the door. Mrs. O'Neill had kind eyes and Mr. O'Neill shook my hand like I was an adult. They told me they took emergency placements for older kids all the time. My room was upstairs, painted blue with a bed that had a thick comforter. Mrs. O'Neill showed me the lock on the inside of the door. She said I could lock it whenever I wanted privacy. That night, I locked and unlocked the door about 20 times, just feeling the difference between choosing to lock myself in and being locked in by someone else. The change felt huge. Lysandra started visiting every week to check how I was doing. The O'Neills gave me space, but made sure I knew they were there if I needed anything. I started seeing Dr. Reyes for therapy sessions twice a week. At first, the nightmares were terrible. I dreamed about being trapped in the guest house with the windows only opening 2 inches. I dreamed about Grandpa's hand on my ankle. I dreamed about Dad's blank face when he saw my blood. Dr. Reyes taught me breathing exercises and ways to calm down when I woke up scared. Slowly, the dreams came less often. After a few weeks, I started sleeping through most nights. 6 weeks after the hearing, my phone rang during breakfast. It was Jimena calling with news about Mom. She said Mom's conviction got overturned and she was released while the prosecution figured out what to do next. The evidence Jimena found proved that the attacks Mom was charged with were actually self-defense situations. Dad had known the truth and used it against both of us anyway. Mom was going to stay with her sister while everything got sorted out. CPS approved supervised visits with me. I felt scared and hopeful at the same time. I hadn't seen Mom in months, and I didn't know if we could fix what got broken. The first visit happened at a CPS office with Lysandra sitting in the corner. Mom walked in and saw me and started crying. She kept saying she was sorry. Sorry she couldn't protect me. Sorry I had to go through everything alone. I cried too. and we held each other while Lysandra looked at her tablet and pretended not to watch. Mom explained how Dad manipulated evidence to make her look dangerous because he wanted sole custody. She'd been fighting from jail to prove her innocence while I was trapped at the grandparents' house. We had a lot to rebuild, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had a parent who actually wanted to protect me. Over the next month, Mom's visits got longer and happened more often. CPS watched how she was doing and whether she had stable housing. She got a job at a grocery store, and her sister helped her find a small apartment. They furnished a room for me with a bed and a desk and posters Mom thought I might like. The court finally approved a trial reunification period where I would live with Mom while keeping up with therapy and CPS check-ins. It wasn't perfect closure because Dad was facing charges and the grandparents were under investigation, and I still had trust issues. But it was real progress toward actual safety. On moving day, I packed my things at the O'Neill's house and thanked them for giving me a safe place when I needed it most. I brought my evidence folder with me to Mom's apartment, not because I needed it anymore, but because it showed everything I survived and documented. Mom saw it when I was unpacking and she understood without me having to explain. She hugged me and promised I would never have to fight alone again. I wasn't dumb enough to think everything would be perfect now. But I was safe, and I was believed, and I had a parent who actually protected me. That was more than I had 6 weeks ago, and it was enough to build on. That is how it happened from my side. What about you? I always enjoy hearing how others would have handled it. Tell me in the comments, and I will be reading through them later.